Very good.
All
Okay.
right. So we're going to get started. Thanks everybody for signing on, registering to this awesome training. I'm Dr. Virgil Moorhead Jr. I'm the executive director here at Two Feathers Native American Family Services. And we're part of a three-part training on racial ethnic socialization, as well as the American Indian life skills by Dr. Teresa LaFramboise. And before she gets started, I wanted to introduce her, talk a little bit about her background. Teresa is a counseling psychologist by training and professor of education in developmental and psychological sciences in the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University. Her research has focused on the effects of non-dominant racial ethnic groups to thrive in the face of adversity, including acculturation demands, discrimination, and major life challenges. She has extensive experience in developing and testing school and community-based psychological interventions with American Indian adolescents, as exemplified in the American Indian Life Skills curriculum, which she's going to talk some about today. You know, I've known Teresa since I was third year in my graduate program, and I owe a lot to my professional growth, confidence, and just trajectory of how I ended up where I'm at professionally from Teresa. I think Teresa was the first to see that, hey, this guy, he might have some
Great.
potential.
Great.
And so she helped me, you know, very much. And not just me, I think that she's been really one of the leaders of putting American Indian mental health on the map. American Indian mental health and being taken seriously across the nation and the world. And Teresa was one of the first to really do that with numerous seminal articles. And we have Teresa to thank because with you know, Native psychologists like myself in a Native American Indian mental health field. So with that, welcome, Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Virgil. Can you hear me okay? Does the sound good enough? Are we okay with sound? Okay, great. Thank you. Well, first of all, let me just say that I'm very excited about this opportunity to talk about racial and ethnic socialization. I've taught a course for a number of years in racial and ethnic identity development. And in my work in Native American mental health, there have been a number of times where I really felt like the kinds of interventions that a community might be wanting me to work on was a little, the people were kind of reluctant to get very assertive about some of the things that were really on their mind in interacting with border towns and mainstream America. And it seemed a little radical. I was once told that it was too California-ish to try to begin to address these issues. But there's incredibly rich work in the field in the area of racial and ethnic socialization. But unfortunately, there's not a lot there with Native American mental health. There are about 8 studies in terms of looking at racial identity, ethnic identity, and its impact on mental health. And there are 2 studies on Native American racial socialization that are empirical studies. So that gives you a sense that there's not a lot there. But what I think is really wonderful about this opportunity is that you, Two Feathers, and the people that are on this call or this webinar today may be the people that'll take this field forward, because it is so very important. And it's very much what is being done, and I'll get into it in a minute, but it's very much what we're considering in terms of this movement about culturally sustaining pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching and community-driven mental health interventions, etc. So I thought what we could do is, when Virgil asked me to do this, and we talked about a 3-part series, I thought the way to do it would be to start with what is racial ethnic identity development, but also what is racial and ethnic identity, because if you haven't really studied it before, it seems like a non very obvious term, but it's pretty deep. And then what do we know about parent racial socialization, and then about school ethnic socialization. So today we'll concentrate mainly on what definitions of racial ethnic identity development, and then racial and ethnic identity development. And then later on, then the subsequent sessions will be on the literature, which is really growing in the area of parent racial socialization, and the literature that's just beginning to grow in the area of school ethnic racial socialization. So, and I'm trying, hopefully, I've put enough together that I can keep you entertained and interested for a period of time. I'd sort of thought of this as maybe a group of 20 teachers, and then we have it like a classroom or something, and now I see there's a big audience, and so I had to kind of change gears about an hour ago, and I think I'm ready. Okay, so this first one's going to be on racial ethnic identity development. One of the things, why would we want to do this? Well, obviously because of mental health disparities, educational disparities. We think that there is a real need, and we think that concentrating some on a person's cultural socialization and being able to support that, which is a form of racial ethnic socialization, is maybe one of the keys to making things better. Just to give you a couple slides on mental health disparities. This is data from a study by Les Whitback and his group, who's at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And it's focusing on only one tribe. So this is only one tribe. But he's been studying this tribe longitudinally for many, many years. And this particular reference is a study of two waves of data. He started out with early adolescents, 10 to 12 years of age. That was wave 1. And then wave 2 was 13 to 15 years of age. And this is information about mental health and substance use disorders and conduct disorder. And if you'll see, what we see here is that the prevalence of each of these issues increases in a matter of just a couple of years. Look, from a lifetime rate of at least one psychiatric disorder, 25.6%, moving in just 2 years up to 44.8% by age 15, between 13 and 15. That's very high. It's about twice that of the general population studies. Substance use, you see, look at the big jump in that age group from 25% to 27.2%. Conduct disorder, 21.4% up to 32.7%. Cannabis dependence, look at that, in just a matter of 2 years, quite different. The alcohol dependence, extreme, and 12-month prevalence of major depression. So, this is, showing that it's a pretty intense situation, and it's increasing with age. This is a slightly different study, and this is done by Jane Costello. And this is part of a larger longitudinal study in Appalachia. And fortunately, over this period of time, the article that outlines this is called The Natural Experiment, because over the period of her longitudinal study, the particular tribe, which was the Cherokee Nation in the Appalachian area, had a casino. They were able to bring in a casino, and so things changed because of because of better employment and that kind of thing. But she looked at change over time, and you can see here the rate in the first cohort, the rate of psychiatric disorder was quite high. These are children, young people relatively. Alcohol dependence, marijuana dependence, and depression, anxiety disorders. But if you also notice that over time, these things go down. And it went down because of the fact that with the casino, more people had jobs, more couples got married, there was more co-parenting, and we saw, improvement. But the other point is it's still pretty high. Okay. Now, in our work, this is a summary from my colleague, Dr. Nydia Ruiz Gracia, who's now a professor at the University of Illinois in the Ed Psych department. But we looked over articles about racial ethnic identity and psychological well-being. And we did, as I said, there are about 8 of them. And we did find that the stronger the Native American identity, the stronger psychological well-being. And we also found that those with traditional and bicultural orientations, okay, bicultural being a person is pretty solid in their Native identity and solid in US mainstream identity, that it was very helpful in terms of adaptive functioning, and it compared, it was a positive, it was much better than people who were heading towards assimilation and not very culturally identified anymore, or people who really didn't have much of an association with either their tribal culture or mainstream culture. And that we also see more about this achieved ethnic identity. And so, the more achieved it is, which means that the more a person has really done some work on it and feels that they belong and has done exploration with it, the higher the psychological well-being. So we think it's very important, and especially at this point in time in this nation where there's so much tension around issues of race and ethnicity. So we're hoping that with this increase in the work on school-based racial identity, racial and ethnic socialization, that we'll be able to address some of these educational disparities. So just a placeholder for one of the reports that just recently came out in the area in Northern California. But the idea being that it's not definitive, but we think that it will make a difference. Okay, so what is racial ethnic socialization? Well, first of all, I guess I should define the word socialization as the process of internalizing norms and ideologies of society. It encompasses both learning and teaching, and is thus the means by which social and cultural continuity are attained. With racial ethnic socializations, parents help their children retain their culture or acquire their cultural identity and their in-group affiliation in the face of a lot of competing pressures to assimilate into US mainstream society. It'd probably be more appropriate if I had pictures of teenagers in here rather than little babies, because they're easier to influence. But then whenever all the competition of what's going on everywhere eases in, it might be a little bit more difficult. Okay. Now, ethnic socialization, now we're going to use these 2 words almost interchangeably, but they're slightly different. Ethnic socialization is how parents and communities assist their children's cultural retention, identity achievement, in-group affiliation, and face of these pressures. Okay, and an ethnic group we're going to define as a group who shares a common culture. And racial socialization is more on how families experience and discuss social inequalities and injustices, and how they teach their children to manage them. Okay. I'm thinking about a time when I was traveling with a group of people in Alabama, and we stopped at a restaurant to get something to eat. And if any of you have ever been to a Cracker Barrel restaurant, you know that the entryway is all these different toys and candies and things like that. And this was a very diverse group of people, some Native and some Black and some white. And one of the little girls went up to the cash register with her money and got a piece of stick candy. And the woman that was running the cash register yelled at her because she thought she was just going to take the candy. And I was standing right behind her. And I asked the cashier, I said, "Is there a problem?" And she looked at me and she said, "No, ma'am." And then when we got back in the car, the little girl, and I mentioned it to the little girl's father, and the little girl was kind of, just quiet. And he right away said, "Now remember, Natalia, when I told you someday something like this might happen." And so it's happened. And what you need to remember is that it's not your problem, and that that the problem is that woman in terms of how she feels about things, but it was not your problem. You did nothing wrong. You went up to pay for your candy, and unfortunately she was mean-spirited and she yelled at you. But that's what I was talking about when I told you about that. So that's an example of how the preparation for these kinds of things can happen. Preparation for bias, preparation for and it's a tricky thing because it's really difficult. And I think that's what the earlier research on racial socialization was about when is it appropriate? At what age is it appropriate to have these kind of conversations? Because are you instilling more negativity or depression or something in somebody when you start having those the talk. And so that's an example. So racial socialization, I juxtapose the label Native American instead of African American from the literature, but how Native American parents maintain children's high self-esteem and prepare them to understand racial barriers given systems of racial stratification in the United States. Okay. Now, when you're thinking about this, I can imagine so many people listening probably think, well, yeah, but there's all kinds of discrimination. There's religious discrimination, there's ageism, there's issues of sexuality, social class, there's all these different aspects. And so if you can think of this kind of image here is the person with all their different social identities, which are a lot. What this area does is it just takes that part of that person's multiple identities, but we're going to take out the racial part and actually concentrate on the racial and ethnic part because so much of it's overlapping, and concentrate on that in this presentation. But realize that it's very complex because generally these things get activated whenever a person feels under threat in a situation. And a lot of times when the threat comes about is when a person is in a unique or token or minority position where that particular aspect of their identity is keyed. So if I was to go to I felt that way a lot in graduate school. When I started, there were only 3 women in the PhD program that I was in. And I think I thought a lot about gender identity at that time. I thought about ethnic identity, but I certainly in the classes, getting my PhD, thought a lot about, with all white males as teachers, thought a lot about gender identity. But racism gets evoked in certain situations, and that's what we're talking about. Okay. Okay, so racial identity is the significance and meaning that individuals place on race in defining themselves. A lot of it is focused on self-concept related to a group's biological and physical traits. Okay. Whereas ethnic is the meaning that individuals place on their group or their cultural traditions, their values, and their attitudes. So researchers in recent years, rather than kind of flip-flop back and forth like I have with these 2 words, have blended them together and say that it's a multidimensional psychological construct that reflects the beliefs and attitudes that individuals have about their ethnic racial group memberships, as well as the processes by which these beliefs and attitudes develop over time. So beliefs and attitudes about one's racial and ethnic affiliation and background. All right. So I just want to do a little bit of history about this. I don't feel right talking about it like, it's my own in any kind of way. But this is the first person, Professor Janet Helms, who's at Boston College now, about to retire. But she definitely has influenced the field in so many ways, in which she developed work about racial, the people of color scale and racial and ethnic statuses. And it was stages, but then it moved to statuses, just because of research argument and that kind of thing. But basically what she talked about is a process where, if you could think of a time when before you're challenged, if there's ever a time that you're in an encapsulated, which is hard to believe anymore, given that people have all this access to media. So even if you lived it within your family and your family was pretty homogeneous ethnically or racially, you still would be exposed to outside influences. But still, if you could think of a time where you are very clear and feel very protected in terms of how you believe and your attitudes about your background, that would be a conformity time. Generally, this all changes when children go to school. 90% of Native American students are educated in public schools. Okay, so some go to public schools that are all Native, but a lot of students go to public schools with many other groups. And so something happens. The second stage is, status, let's say, dissonance. It's when something happens to you where you start to question the beliefs and attitudes that you were raised with up to that point. And you begin to wonder about who you are as a result of this different idea that comes into your world view. And then in reaction to that, you usually try to go back and get reassurance and get more information. So you immerse yourself, maybe it's immerse yourself back in terms of, getting advice from your family, or you immerse yourself with friends of your own group and stay there for comfort until eventually you don't need that anymore. And then you can begin to internalize how you feel, and you can begin to think about people more broadly, like as human beings. Now, that's some of what she would say. Now, the person that really took this a lot further, in my opinion, but around the same time, is Professor William Cross. And he came out with this outstanding article, The Negro to Black Conversion Experience, in Black World back in the early 70s. And it was kind of, it's psychological, but it's also very clearly explains a lot of the way people went from being Negro to Black to African American through the civil rights movement. But it's amazing. So, but he has what he called stages, and they're very much like what Dr. Helms talked about. But basically, you have the pre-encounter, which again is that period of time of more safety, or you have a sense of who you are, you think you are, but then something happens. It's kind of like the incident at the counter at the Cracker Barrel where the little girl gets yelled at by someone. And the reason I think she was yelled at was because since she was with me, nobody thought she was Black and I am who I am with my, physical characteristic. They thought she was alone and didn't have anybody with her, or she didn't have a parent with her that was going to protect her. And so she had this encounter, and then she reacts to it. Generally after that, with the encounter comes a lot of anger, and people, are hurt and anger, and people usually go into immersion where they want to immerse themselves and be only with people of their own ethnic or racial group. And if you can think about this is a heightened time of conscious raising or conscious awareness, and might be that it might be the time when you would basically move to a certain area in order not to have to interact with people like the person that had hurt you in the encounter. Might be when you study Native American studies and move to, certain place or dedicate your life to do something, but basically you're very anti-white and pro your own ethnic group. And then, like the Helen stages, talks about after a period of time, after that, wound is healed and people are a little bit more introspective and time has passed, people begin to internalize it and feel okay about who they are. And some of them go further to the commitment stage where they want to help other people that are going through this kind of experience so that, their social justice happens, more respect among people, and being made, and a lot of time period of political advocacy. How are I doing? Has anybody got, am I boring you guys or?
Not at all.
I'm looking for some signs here. Okay, well, let me know, Jennifer. Yes.
I just wondered, you had said that there was a certain age and really that was a big question. When should the parents have that conversation with their child? And I teach kindergarten and I just wondered, what is that age? Or is it different for every individual and every family?
That's a great question. Thank you. Well, I think it would be different for every individual and every family, but I think one thing is, and that was what's a lot of the research, and the person that's done this research and excellent work in the beginning was Diane Hughes at the University of Michigan, because they looked at different age groups and they were trying to decide, and they were looking at, early adolescence. I mean, it probably would have a lot to do, one, with the neighborhood that you live in and how important is it to get that message out quickly or not. Also, the temperament of the child, and also how you do it. I think the other important part is how it's done, and that's what we're beginning to learn in the work that's being done right now. But certainly, if you do it too soon, I think that you could cause a lot of defensiveness and maybe anger and depression, and that's what we have to know about. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Pardon?
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, Karen. Well, the other thing is I might as well stop right now just to say that at the time, there's newer work now, but basically Diane Hughes talked about what are the different types of, racial socialization that parents use. And we're getting ahead of ourselves. Next class, next time I would like to go into that more. But the one that's used the most is cultural socialization. Okay. And, and that is what we know about, basically a lot about support for culture in terms of teaching about the, one's ethnic and racial history and heritage, promoting cultural customs and traditions, racial and ethnic pride, etc. So that's role models, exposing one historical figures, relevant books, artifacts, music, stories, all this work on multiculturalism in schools. It's a lot, that's a lot of that. But then there's also another one, which is preparation for bias. And this is where parents try to help increase their child's awareness of discrimination and provide children with coping strategies that they can use when it happens. There's also promotion of mistrust. That's one that's used less frequently as well, which is when you teach children the potential for discrimination and to be wary of interracial interactions, which is unlike preparation for bias because it includes messages about ways to cope. And then there's also mainstream socialization, where children are encouraged to develop skills and characteristics that they need to thrive in mainstream culture, but not at the expense of one's own ethnic pride. And that's the important part. It's not at the expense of becoming just totally acculturated. Okay. Right. So in all this, I mean, one of the things that kind of and in the racial and ethnic identity literature, the main theory backing it within the mainstream theorist was Erik Erikson's work. I think he studied the Yurok, didn't he? Mm-hmm. And many other places. But basically what Erikson is, he has, his theory of psychosocial development, And he talks about these different, kind of conflicts that happen at different developmental stages in one's life. And if you look at the identity versus role confusion, he sort of situates this sort of challenge in adolescence. And to his theory, this is the work of adolescence, is figuring out one's identity broadly. But, so you would think you'd map it onto that. So adolescence is probably the prime time for this. And what I want to say is that I want to bring in here Dr. Thomas Parham, because Thomas, he wrote this incredible book called Psychological Storms. But in essence, what he was saying that people of color don't have the luxury of only dealing with it when they're adolescents. And that is because throughout life, there are going to be experiences and challenges about one's integrity as a person of color. And so it's going to be a lifelong endeavor. In his book, he talks about, I just have this picture because it reminds me of experiences with oppression cause many African Americans to be hypersensitive regarding race-related issues. And, and certainly we know from the work on health psychology that definitely the impact on one's life expectancy and health among African Americans is greatly impeded by the amount of discrimination that they experience. In Thomas's book, I think this helps. What he's showing is he does want to situate sort of this, but he's saying this is throughout life. It's not just in adolescence, but he's saying that a lot of it happens around that time. And that the sense a person has of themselves can be scaffolded and supported by one's primary culture, that oval around the self, so to speak, to the left, right? And the environment can be supportive or unsupportive. And that when it's supportive, African American person develops a positive sense of their, of being an African person, their African self-consciousness. When it is unsupported, then they need to go through, they probably will be going through the process that Cross is talking about of conversion, from being, into Negrosance, but into basically being, feeling positive about being an African American person. And I think this is really important because a lot has to do with the amount of support. And that's why we really believe that cultural socialization is what we're trying to advocate for the support. I think we don't really know enough now, given Karen's question, to feel really confident about the preparation for bias, preparation for bias, and for the promotion of mistrust. And it's not used very frequently, not nearly as much as the cultural socialization. Okay. This is Dr. Helen Neville. She's at the University of Illinois. And she worked with Bill Cross and made modifications and did some really neat work with people in South Africa, Australia, and the United States, looking across, in this more international study about, racial identity, and sort of helped revise a little bit. So this is just their summary, that the first would be identity and worldview to be changed, the pre-encounter. And the reason that they say that is it's not going to stay the same. It's not going to be immediate. And a lot of times younger people, because of the messaging and just the exposure to mainstream society, identifies with the oppressor to some extent. It looks, all these, all that you see on TV looks so much better than maybe the way one lives, that, you can build in sort of the sense of not feeling so good about, your family or your community when you think that due to economic status or whatever they see being portrayed better, it could be that. And so generally they think of the pre-encounter stage as kind of being the stage of naivete. The second then is the encounter, the event or series of events that triggers change. The third is called a transition stage, where the old and emergent identities struggle for dominance. There's a lot of struggle in there. And then the fourth being the new identity takes hold, it is internalized and habituated, internalization. And then the fifth, one's frame of reference becomes a platform and personal resources for sustained long-term collective action with others. It's a little bit redundant, but I just wanted to be sure that, that people saw a more contemporary person that's doing this kind of work on this area. Now, the person that is most well-known in the field is, I think, and probably the most studies done on his model is Dr. Robert Sellers, who's a provost at the University of Michigan. And he basically really challenged this stage model that we've repeated now 3 times, and developed this model, which is a multidimensional model of racial identity development. And he's, it's not so simple. It's not a stage. There's a lot going on here. So in essence, he's saying, if you look at these different bubbles, the first one being racial centrality, that is the extent to which a person usually defines themselves with regard to race. So how much am I defined by my race? How much do I think about my race? Okay, racial centrality. And then along with that, situational cues are going on all the time. So we've got this sense of who I think I am in terms of my race, and what situations present themselves influence racial salience. Salience is how relevant is that part of myself, of that part, to my sense of my self-concept at a particular moment in a particular situation. So how salient is that to me at this moment? There are times when it doesn't mean anything. And it's really funny, I'll have to say, I've had some students, especially a couple biracial students, multiracial students, or even students, I have students that'll tell me, listen, I speak Spanish, and if I go up to, get on the basketball court or something, and people think I'm Latino, I'm not going to tell them any different. And, because no feeling of it, inadequate or of fakeness or anything like that. I'm just, I'm instrumental. I want to be able to play, and I'm going to, I'm not going to change it. I'm not going to do anything different. Okay. But anyway, racial salience, not racial ideology, is an individual's beliefs, opinions, and attitudes with respect to the way they feel that members of their race should act. Okay. And Sellers has written some interesting things about how there's a lot of judgment within a community about how people think members of their group should act. That is the racial ideology. And then racial regard is looking more at the feelings of positivity and negativity towards being of the racial group that you are. And these things all influence how you look at and think and feel at the time, and also how you act. And so that's kind of Sellers' social psychological explanation of how this all plays itself out. Now, we're moving along to how does this fit with Native American identity? And this is Professor John Gonzalez at the University of Minnesota in Bemidji. And he adapted Sellers' scale for Native American youth. And this is the scale that we use in our research. Okay. So in terms of, he took this items from Sellers' scale, and it had focus groups, and he did some modification with the people in the focus groups so that the wording was more appropriate. So he said, so for racial centrality, he would talk about items might be, I feel close to other Native American people. I have a strong sense of belonging to other Native people. If I were to describe myself to someone, one of the first things that I would say is that I'm Native American, or I tell them what my tribe is. Okay, so that's racial centrality. How much does it anchor me, and I really feel like I belong. The next is private regard. So how do I feel about being Native American? Okay, I'm happy that I'm Native American. I'm proud that I'm Native American. I feel good about Native people. And I will say in the use of this scale, what we generally do is if we're working with a particular tribe, we use the tribal identifier, not use the words Native American. But if it's in a intertribal group, then we would have to use the word Native American. And then public regard. And these are how you think other people think, what you think other people think about your ethnic group. So most people think that Native Americans are as smart as people of other races. People think that Native Americans are as good as people of other races. People from other races think that Native Americans have made important contributions. Okay, so that's how that goes. All right, now, how are we doing on time? Do we need a break, or do we want me to keep going?
I mean, yeah, maybe we could take some questions.
Okay, let's do that for a minute, and then we're going to get into some other things. Okay.
Does anybody have any questions? I guess I have one question just to set like the frame of like, so if we have, teachers, other, providers that are working with Native children, adolescents, just to kind of maybe set the frame of what you've just been talking about is how is this relevant to their work in the sense of mental health and wellness? If you could just tie that together, just the importance of racial socialization, this identity work to Native youth and adolescents and mental health and racial socialization and identity.
Okay, thank you. So it's a good one, Virgil. The first thing that I failed to mention that I should have is that one of the reasons I've chosen to go into this part about racial identity development is because I don't think, as an educator or a psychologist, foster parent, parent, that we should do too much of any of this without thinking about our own racial ethnic identity. And so in essence, what I'm trying to do is to sort of do a little mini course on racial ethnic identity as the foundation, because I don't think we, and Beverly Tatum would say this herself, how can we do this with anyone else when we haven't done our own exploration? So what I have with me as well is just a section, something I wanted to do towards the end. But it's basically how do you it's a questionnaire that people just answer for themselves about how do you describe yourself, but it's in a variety of different ways to get at what that is. Okay, so that's the first thing. That's one of the reasons why I'm going through this right now, because I think that the foundation needs to be, I understand what my own racial and ethnic identity is. Okay, I think it makes all the difference in the world as an educator in terms of what I choose to do and how I educate children. If I am not aware of my biases or my background, I may not think of, I may make all kinds of inadvertent mistakes, or I may make decisions that are detrimental. Let's face it, tracking is a perfect example of the structural inequality that comes about as a result of, well-meaning educators trying to just systematically get the resources to the right students. I mean, not the right students, but to students in an efficient way. I think that's probably how tracking happened in the beginning. But there's an assumption there that some students, should be able to fast track, and others that need more time and remediation, we have to do it. And maybe we need to separate them for that to happen. Okay, but if I don't check myself, would I ever, do I attend to some students more than others? Just because they are maybe more, they're more verbal, and they're more aligned with mainstream models of what is academically successful behaviors. And I think a really great example of that is, if anybody has a chance to read it, Brian Brayboy's article about hiding in the ivy, about Native students at Harvard, and how some do these things differently based upon cultural socialization and all that kind of thing. But there, so that's one. I think it influences educators. It influences whether or not we go, all in for cultural sustaining pedagogy, or for multiculturalism, or we just say, I'm just a content matter expert and I'm not going to deal with that. I'll let the language and culture teacher handle it. I'm not going to handle it. You see what I mean? I think it influences each and every one of us as decision makers, and that has an impact on the kids. Okay, does that sound reasonable? Was there any more to your question that I didn't answer?
Yeah, I just think just the one kind of follow-up is like, there's a lot of like within the schools, social emotional learning, trauma informed movement, and this sort of this racial identity piece is often left out. And so how that is integrated and should be with the socio-emotional movement and the trauma-informed movement for Native students. Is that kind of how it's tied?
Yes, the way I want to, yes, thank you. I think the way it can be tied in is that if people really see really the main message of all of this, of all of the different methods of racial socialization, the cultural socialization piece is so very important, okay? And the reason I think for social emotional learning, the reason a lot of these evidence-based, and it isn't just about evidence-based, but basically these programs that have been developed, and there are great ones that stay away from it, is because they can, if they don't deal with it specifically to different ethnic groups, they can sell more. Because once you have something that's Native American life skills, then you are marketing to one large population, a very tribally diverse population, but it's not gonna be in the San Francisco school district. You see what I mean? And so I think that if we can get educators on board about this is a very important part of children's lives as well, it can do a lot in terms of their psychological well-being and their motivation to learn. Then, but we have to kind of, get that message across so that they can supplement what's already existing in some of those, pre-developed programs that are pretty culturally neutral. Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah. Yes. So then who trains the teachers? Who teaches the teachers to be culturally sensitive or racially sensitive?
Oh, that's a good, well, I think we're hoping this is a start. I mean, we can't do it necessarily in 3 sessions. But I think it's an awareness. I think it's a very important one. And I think when you start showing hard evidence, like like I said, we do not have hard evidence for a large body of work for the Native American population because people haven't been studying it. But with Latino, Asian American, African American, there is a real growing body of literature that will show that this is value added. This is very effective in increasing educational performance and increasing psychological well-being. And so we're just going to make that translation. Then we are assuming that it will probably work for Native kids because it has in the few studies that we've done. So I think it's getting the information out. And a lot of times people don't go there unless they're presented with it. And hopefully we're going to help them get there.
I just want to say that, especially with racial identity, because I'm mixed races and grew up in the city and was all fine until I moved to the other portion of my ethnic makeup. But it was a real struggle when I was younger. I'm more settled in now because I'm older, but it was a real struggle of which group, I kind of belong to. And it was very, very difficult. And even college even made it worse because they really put you under a microscope, and basically you start exploring the different type of, groups. And then, but then I have my mom and my dad. They were separate, but they have a lot of crossover. And so, when I was growing up and looking in, it was a struggle in my late teens and early 20s. And, things kind of came together as I gotten older. And so what you're saying is I can totally relate and see. And I just remember and recall my struggles growing up. And I know that people do that because, growing up, I was darker. And I was, kind of ostracized for being the darker one. And basically even with my own race, it was, you're too dark, and it was never a balance of where I fit in, because even though I'm in this group, now I'm a darker one in the group. And so there was a difference, there. And so, of course, I've met that in other races, but, even with my own, it was just different, although I was still part of that group.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you, Aaron. Yes, thank you. That's very nice to get the validation, and it sounds good that you've gone through it, and you're there, and you're the person that you are, which is great. So it is hard work, but I don't think it's terrible work, because I think people really get into it when they start to realize they have the opportunity to explore it. And let me just say where this is. I teach at Stanford, and they have in summer sophomore seminars, and this is for students. They can apply for it, and they can apply for different kinds of seminars. And it's 2-week, come to campus 2 weeks before school starts, and you have a seminar. And it's 3 hours a day for 2 weeks. And so I offered this seminar for 3 summers, and I finally just quit doing it because I wanted to have those first few weeks before school started kind of to myself, because it was really intensive. But these would be students, that are going between their freshman and sophomore year at Stanford. And a very common, I would have them write an essay, a 500-word essay about a time that they were discriminated against and how it affected their identity. And a very common theme was what their experience was when they found out they got admitted to Stanford. A lot of them were in honor AP classes, felt very accepted among their diverse friendship group or whatever. And then when they got that letter of acceptance, people challenged them and said, well, you got in just because you're Native. And what that did to them and how they felt about, being tokenized in that way, and being, in competition where they had never felt the competition with their friends before, at the end of their high school year, and all those kinds of things that would just come up. I mean, incredible stories. They have a big and little sister SIB program with East Palo Alto, and one of the students talking about taking his little SIB out with him to get a pizza on Sunday night, and they get stopped by the cops, and the cop questions him, and he just talked about what it felt like to suddenly become so deferential and so positive to the cop, and watching his little SIB sit next to him and just look at him like he couldn't believe this is the way this guy was acting, and how he felt horrible to have to humiliate himself in such a way in front of his little SIB. I mean, there are all these different kinds of experiences of people. So as Erickson talked about it being a time of adolescence, I think a really critical time is when a person goes away from their home area to college, and then they're interacting with people from different ethnic groups that they've never met before, some of them, or haven't been that close with, and they're learning so much about other cultures that it's a really, really critical time as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Teresa, we have one question. This is from Maggie Peters, and she says, what can be done about the recognition of the relatively recent genocide in our area, and the expectation for achievement similar to non-native peoples. There is so much healing to be done in our communities, and the focus is always academics. I feel this is unrealistic, and our educational focus needs to be SEL competencies before academics.
I think a lot could be done with that. If you think about, like, with the SEL, actually the person, and I'm going to talk about it week 3, but Howard Hughes Howard Stevenson, in a way, does that. I mean, he has he's at University of Pennsylvania, and he does work with teenagers around anger, and so it's, in a way, it's an SEL group that is where on a regular basis these youth come in and they process the kinds of experiences that they've had this week that made them angry. And many of those experiences are, being disregarded, feeling invisible, being confronted, being distrusted, followed in stores, you name it. And then they go through this in terms of what are the feelings like, what are the, and how did you handle it, etc. Now, there are people that, especially, the newer scholars, that are saying that we're not changing anything when we're helping students adapt to the inequities and the discrimination that goes on in wider society. We're just helping them adapt, and that's not making the change that's necessary. So I do realize there's the criticism about that, but I do think that a lot of this work on social emotional learning can be tied to understanding of cultural practices that maybe are not really obvious to a lot of the children, because it's not, they're not visible. Maybe their families are not, that engaged in cultural in the more traditional cultural practices, but they can learn, and that they can also be very excited about, even whether it's not practiced at home. So you see, I think that these things can work in tandem. But I also want to say that that all of the secret sauce is not in only working with the children to be adaptive. It is in making these major structural changes. So I agree. I mean, when you're talking about what has happened historically, and I don't, and even in the recent years or last month, those things really need to be addressed in the larger society. And I think it is hard to I think we keep working at strengthening the education of students and addressing multiple things, not just the academics, but these other interpersonal things, as well as intrapersonal. I mean, intrapersonal, when you think about, just for some people, this is really, really very important and can really help. I was thinking of in one school that I was in, and the way, getting back to the question about how does this affect teachers? There was an assembly, and basically, it was kind of like, advertising the drum group and the group that were, girls and others that were going to work on regalia and that kind of thing. And one of the teachers who was encouraging some of the students just to get out there and dance. Just don't worry about what people think and what how you look, and you'll learn how to do it. Just throw yourself out there and do it. And then the more traditional students in that group felt so disrespected that they took it that the teacher who was trying to encourage them was being disrespectful, because you don't go out and make a fool of yourself in front of people when you don't know what you're doing. And so there again is another example where that teacher probably didn't realize it's not, you don't learn by trial and error in a public forum like that, or you don't want to embarrass anybody in that way. All right. And it also inadvertently said that this cultural stuff isn't really that important. You can just go out there and try it, you know, kind of like baseball or something, you know. And so I think it's important that teachers have that kind of sensitivity around what they're even expecting students to do when they try to do this cultural immersion work. Okay. I don't know if I answered the question. I hope I did.
Yeah, and just with the Howard Stevenson, his work was with adolescent African American sort of inner city, and the work was around identity, and that work to sort of buffer against institutional racism and discrimination, which is kind of what you're talking about today, right?
That's right. Thank you. Okay. Do you want to go on?
Yeah, sounds.
Can we go?
About
I
20
mean,
minutes.
or do you guys want to just take a stretch break for about 5 minutes? And we'll come back.
Yeah, let's do like a couple minutes, and then we got till 4:30. So yeah, like 3 minutes.
Oh, just 3 minutes. Oh, we've only got till 4:30. Oh yeah, let's just stand up a little bit, move around and come back, okay? I think it'll help. Thank you.
Hi, Teresa. This is Shoshone from Two Feathers as well. And just so that you're aware, there's a lot of participants asking if they can get copies of the PowerPoint or if the resources can be made available afterwards.
Okay, thank you. That's fine. So how would we, how can we do that? Do you have a website that you could post them and they could go to your website?
Yeah, or we could send on. We have all the email, so people registered through email, so we could send it whatever you would like to send via email.
Okay, all right. Okay, so what I think I would do is I could send this, but I'm going to convert it.
Sure.
And then I also want to send that list of references. Because I think if anybody really wants to go, that'll get them then to this literature pretty quickly. And then if we proceed with 2 and 3, I would do the same thing for each one of them. See, this is only the reference list I sent you, Virgil, is only for today.
Okay.
Okay, and it'd be good. I hopefully many of them will stay in for the subsequent ones, because I think I think it'd be helpful if they're really into it. Yeah.
All right.
So I think we can get started, or
Yep, I think.
ready?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I just want to go back to some of the kind of interesting models and work that Native people have done in this area, or that has been done with Native Americans. Okay, and this first one is a book by Teresa O'Neill. She's an anthropologist, and she lived and did an ethnography with the Flathead Reservation in Montana, and wrote this book about called Disciplined Hearts, which is really about Flathead depression. But in it, she has this model, called the empty center. And I think it shows about how this isn't all self-definition, that a person can be who they are in terms of their Native identity, but that is influenced or at least questioned a lot by people from different levels of depth of understanding. So what she says is that the closer that you get, if we go out to the outside concentric circle, the darkest one, this would be how Native people in that circle interacting with the general population are probably considered Native. In other words, often within mainstream society, people don't have a very strict definition of who a Native person is. And therefore they might get more affirmation of being a Native person by non-natives than they would by more traditional Native people. And the further in they get to the real Indians, the real people, you have to read the book to get the whole thing. But anyway, then the less Native they're going to appear. An example could be someone that says, well, there really aren't any real Hoopas left. And why would that be said? Or Miami people, my case. Because people are thinking about what it was like at a point in time when people were more solid in their identity. And so maybe that isn't there anymore. Even though the population's there, people are there, but they aren't. The definition of what is real is so subjective, and it really is different. I mean, when we've had, in some of our studies, we've tried to develop a scale of traditionality, and we asked the members of the community to define it. And in communities in the Southwest, the criteria is much more refined in terms of what is a person from a Pueblo member in this particular Pueblo. And it isn't just what you know, it's did you learn it from the person that you're supposed to learn it from, and things like that. So it's all very subjective. And that's what she gets to in her book. So just wanted to mention that one. This is Dr. Joseph Gaughan, who's worked, Virgil has published with him. He's a great fan of Virgil's, and as am I. Anyway, Dr. Gaughan is at Harvard. And he wrote a chapter. He doesn't do a lot on, he does about identity, Native identity, but he wrote this really interesting chapter. The reference is coming, which, by the way, Virgil has a list of references for the slides that I'm showing that you can get to them, that I've given to him, and he can get it to you if you're interested. But anyway, he wrote a book chapter in a book called Urban American Indian Mental Health, about Native identity. And he talked about a number of different challenges that Native people have. And I'm not going to go into, I think I'm going to slip by these slides for a little bit, but I highly recommend the chapter. But what I thought was interesting is this part here. He talks about the population growth of Native Americans from like the 1990 census to on each time, and that demographers would say that the population is growing more than probably would happen by population growth. And so he's saying, why is it now that the population has really jumped from 1.5 million to 2.5 million, and then now that people can designate more than one ethnicity on the census, it's quite high, quite a bit higher than it used to be. But anyway, so he gives some examples. It could be that there's a Native American ethnic renewal. There's a biracial baby boom after the repeal of miscegenation laws that happened. Different social and economic ties, positive shift in looking and thinking about Native people, or it could be ethnic fraud. So he mentions that. And then he goes into whether or not a person is a real Indian, kind of going back to Terry O'Neill's Empty Center about the real Indian. Depends upon whether you are involved in cultural traditions, what you look like, what's your blood quantum, do you have a DIB card, are you from a federally recognized tribe, where were you born, do you live on a reservation, do you speak the language, do you have, what are your family ties, what's your cultural knowledge. So there's all these different ways in which people size one another up as to whether they're Native or not, based on things like this. He also talks in a sort of cynical way about how real Indians can't sustain happy marriages or raise terrific children or excel in their academic world or pursue successful careers or manage money well or thrive in the big city. And he's being, sarcastic, but then there are the people that will question when someone's successful, can they be real? Are they really real? Kind of thing. So that's complex. And then what Joe does is he criticizes the kind of models that we've used, like the Sellers model or the Helms people of color model, those kinds of 1 or 2 dimensional models, because he says that it's really has to be in the analysis of what you see interpersonally. So more of an ethnographic or qualitative approach. But he's saying as an example, and he has a story about this young woman that meets a person, and he kind of boasts about having been, let's say, at Standing Rock, and or in this case it was Alcatraz, and then so he's kind of like feeling comfortable about his identity in that context, but then in the evening, say going to a sweat and maybe being asked to lead one of the rounds, in where he becomes very humble and explains that he doesn't know the language and he would, doesn't feel comfortable being able to do that. Or he goes through it, but he doesn't feel the same amount of, comfort that he did earlier in the day. That doesn't mean he's a chameleon. That doesn't mean he's any less Indian. It means that this is how, interactive and important it is in people's lives. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead on this, and I just want to mention the work of Stephanie Freiberg. And Stephanie is a professor at the University of Michigan Psych Department now, but she is, I think she's well known for a lot of work on identity. But her work on basically the Indian mascot issue. And in her dissertation work, what she did is she talked about and found that the reason basically that non-natives, in measuring self-esteem of natives and non-natives, she gave, primed people in terms of an image of Chief Wahoo, an image of kind of like the tragic Indian, and another image, I can't recall which one it is. I'm just talking off the top of my head, but let's say it's Pocahontas. But anyway, basically they're looking at these different images, and she measured primed them with these images, and then she measured among them, she had native and non-native subjects, participants, and for the native participants, their self-esteem went down, but seeing these images for the non-native participants, their self-esteem went up, which she's believing is part of the reason why it's been such a difficult thing for different, sports fans to be able to give up the issue of the native mascot. And I'm really not doing justice to her work. It's really outstanding. So I want to say that there are Native scholars doing this kind of work. It's a fascinating area, and I think it's really important. Okay, now I want to just take a minute and ask you all to fill this out. It's your own private little survey. This is the multi-group ethnic identity measure. And if you could just fill in the blank, what you do is you say, I have a clear sense of my Miami background and what it means to me. And then I would rate it strongly agree to strongly disagree to strongly agree. And just think about each of these aspects. This is a scale by Jean Finney, and it measures sense of exploration and belongingness. Those are the two constructs that are in here. But it will be important for you to think about where you are on this measure, if you'd like to, for a few minutes, and then we can open it up to some more questions, and then we'll be ready to leave. Okay. Can we see the video? Virgil, it's just a couple minutes. This is what we're hoping we can get to.
There's no sound.
Virgil, you're muted. I wonder if that makes a difference.
It probably does. Let me unmute. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Young people like me have a lot to offer if you would just listen.
Young people have answers if you would just listen.
Young people like me have ideas for undoing racism, if you would just listen.
Young people like me see ways to achieve health equity, if you would just listen.
Are you listening?
Empathy. Understand that we all come from unique and different backgrounds, and that we should treat each other accordingly.
Create access to health and quality healthcare, no matter race, income, sexual orientation, or religion.
Lower the price of healthy food so people can take care of their bodies.
We are all one from Mother Earth. We must take care of her and all of her children.
Realize that humans aren't standardized, and our education system should reflect that.
Acknowledge, don't ignore historical trauma and privilege, and work to create an even playing field.
Make neighborhoods safer so people can exercise.
There is no such thing as colorblind. See color and accept people for who they are.
We hope you heard us, but our actions speak as well. When given the opportunity, the youth can do amazing things.
I raised money in Plan Day Kids Zone for NHI's Gratitude Run. I'm in middle school.
This summer, I organized an event called Footsteps for Families to raise money for low-income families struggling during the pandemic. We managed to raise a few $1,000s in school supplies, all of this while still in college.
While still in high school, I helped lead NHI's running medicine program. I wanted to teach the youth holistic wellness through running.
I am leading a program for a nonprofit organization, NHI's Healers of Tomorrow program. I also organized a PPE drive for my Zia Pueblo community, and another effort to get all 300 youth in my tribe educational kits in the summer during the COVID-19 lockdown. I am a senior in high school.
Start with yourselves and your friends. Keep one another accountable about what you do and say about others, even if society might view them as different.
Decolonize and localize our food system.
Don't minimize racism. Accept it and do your part to reverse it.
Support us and trust us to lead the way.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So I think that about wraps it up.
All right, so thank you, Teresa. We'll be sending a survey out, I think, here in like 15 minutes. So if you have any feedback, and also we'll be sending the link for those of you that are signed up for it will be in December 2nd. So not next Wednesday, because it's a holiday, but the following week. And then the following week. So the link, we'll send another link in like the morning of or the night before, and then a reminder for the upcoming 2 more trainings. Did I miss anything?
Sounds good, buddy. Thank you for all your time. I always appreciate it.
Thank you for attending, Chris.
Yeah, my pleasure. Jennifer, good to see you. Thank you, Teresa.
You too.
Good job.
Thank
See
you.
you in this. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
All right, good.
Thank you.